We have the best attendance once tracked down.
Yes, there you go.
You're so good at getting tracked.
Okay, so it's only David Hawking is not with us yet. Mike, sorry, Dennis, he was in the same meeting you were in?
Oh, here
He
he comes.
was,
He's in the waiting
so
room.
he'll be on shortly.
Here he comes, stepping in from the waiting room.
Hi, Drew. Yep.
Hello, David. Welcome.
That was the
Hi, David.
conversation.
Hi, folks. Yeah, Dennis and I were just at another meeting, and Michael should be joining us in a second.
Yeah.
Michael's here. He's
Mike-
eating.
He's grabbing a bite to eat incognito. Well, good. So everyone's here. So why don't we call a meeting to order? I know we've got time constraints tonight, and probably, I don't know about you folks, I haven't had dinner yet, so I'm going to do that afterwards. Do I have a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
Sure.
Okay, Kirsty, second. Louise, all in favor?
I forget if I vote or not.
I better go to gallery view here. I can't see everyone. There we go. Great. And then the second item of business is adoption of the minutes from the July 15th meeting. Do I have a motion? No motion to adopt the minutes. Thanks, Dennis. Second. Kirsty, you were there.
Was I? Okay. Sorry, staff, I haven't read
Louise,
them.
thank you. All in favor?
Okay, I'll second you.
Okay.
Good
I haven't
faith.
read them, but they're fine, I'm sure.
And that's carried as well. I don't see anyone else here from the public, so I guess we'll move right on to the council referral. So Daniel, it's only a little over 200 pages, so you want to do it one page at a time?
Sure, yeah. I'm just going to share my screen here.
Okay, great.
Does that work? Are you seeing the presentation?
Yeah.
I'll check.
There we are.
Yes.
Okay. So this is the project of the land use bylaw, which we're calling the housekeeping bylaw. So I presented it to council at July 27th to get referred to the APC and to a committee of the whole of council, which we're going to hold later in October. And just to give, so this is some of the work we've been doing with the APC for the past, couple of years, I feel like, looking at some of our definitions and how we're defining, especially buildings. So the goals being to clarify and streamline the land use bylaw, but not to do substantial changes to permitted land uses on properties. So every time I talk about this with my planning department or with other departments in the municipality, I'm trying to keep it sort of reined in, and that we're not trying to change, but by doing this bylaw, I don't want people to wake up and suddenly have different things that they can and can't do in their property, or that we sort of, I don't want to feel like I'm trying to sneak, substantial changes through, but instead trying to find ways to clarify it and to fix problems we're encountering, but not actually change people's land uses. So with that in mind, I'll go through. What I've done is I've tried to group some of the changes that we've done into different categories to help try to make sense of the whole bylaw. But I'm open to any comments people have either now or following the meeting. People can just email me directly if they have any comments that have come to them as they've sort of thought about the bylaw and changes or problems they've had with it or things they'd like to see changed. But the first categories we went through and we combined a bunch of definitions. So we've ended up in our land use bylaw with a series of places where we have definitions that mean almost the same thing. And so what we've tried to do is combine them into a single definition, and especially in places where we find if we allow one, we almost always allow the other use. So for example, our land use bylaw has definitions for office and for general services. So offices, it says, sort of describes what offices are, but it says, but they're not general services. And general services are things like, even like banking or insurance places where you're getting service done. But almost every place that we allow office, we allow general service as well. And we thought, okay, this doesn't seem necessary. We're just gonna make one category that includes all of those type of uses. Or same with agriculture and horticulture. So in our bylaw, agriculture is like raising animals primarily for farming, and horticulture, or even actually, raising plants and selling vegetables to be consumed, whereas horticulture is like raising plants to sell the plants themselves. So you're selling tomato plants as opposed to tomatoes, but everywhere that we allow agriculture, we allow horticulture. So we thought this doesn't seem necessary to have a distinction. And then in other zones, we've ended up with just different definitions that kind of are covering the same thing. So in various places, we allow medical clinic, or we allow health clinic. In some places, we allow medical and health clinic, I think. And in one, we allow a hospital. But when we looked at it, we kind of thought, well, we're kind of allowing anywhere we're okay with a medical clinic, we'd be okay with sort of one covering definition for it. So that's one category of changes that we've made. The next is similar in that we're looking at sort of are there ones that we can group and have a covering definition for all those types of things? So we have a definition now for a public community facility. So in various zones, we would allow public library, or we allow museum or art gallery, or some zones say they allow public library and museum. But so we just want one definition that'll say, okay, we're allowing this type of thing. And same with emergency services in terms of allowing fire hall and ambulance hall and police station, which are generally always permitted together in our zones, but some zones, we obviously rezone something to allow it to be the fire hall. So like on lot 3, but thinking that really we're saying that we're allowing emergency services.
So community centers are public community facilities.
I think they're not actually. I'll have to check that. That's a good point.
Yeah, it's an important point now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or because I may just have left it as community. I think it's actually community campus is how we've defined it in that property, but I'll
Right.
check. Yeah.
Which is a nice descriptor, but it kind of comes out of a study. That's the Hotzenbacher report that started to study that started to call it that sort of campus precinct, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. So I will check that out. And then finally, we removed some definitions of places that essentially never showed up. Like for some reason, we have a definition for lot depth. So defining but then we never use the term ever in the entire land use bylaw. Or we have a definition for amusement arcade, which exists solely to be excluded from an indoor entertainment facility, I think. So we wanted to be very sure that an indoor entertainment facility did not include an amusement arcade. So
right.
I'm going to be removing that definition.
And a columbarium.
So those are, yeah, columbarium. I think instead, actually, that one, I think we're having a cemetery definition, and it's sort of included as a thing within a cemetery. So that's it for the sort of the overall definitions. Then I was going to go through some of the sections in more detail in terms of what we're proposing to do for some of the different pieces of how we're defining buildings and doing it.
Can I just one thing about definitions and continuity?
Yeah.
I've noticed in a couple of places, for example, attached dwellings is sometimes referred to in the definitions as dwellings, comma, attached, but in most of the document it's referred to as attached dwellings. So if someone is looking for a definition for attached dwellings, they might not consider looking at D, dwellings, comma, attached.
Yeah.
And the same thing is for, I think it's the natural grade. Yeah. I think that's the same. There's a bit of inconsistency and continuity of how that's referred to in the document.
It is though, Louise, common parlance in these zoning bylaws to use the noun as the thing that's being defined, and the other part is a descriptor. So so it would be grade, and then the various kinds of grade. That would actually be typically how you would find it in the definition section of a zoning bylaw.
Okay.
And I think, in fact, Daniel has specifically reversed a couple of those because of that. If I'm not, sorry, Daniel, I'm speaking out of turn here.
No, that's helpful. I know I was trying to, because I know, yeah, in the current, like in our current bylaw, we're very vague. So like some of our dwellings will be, yeah, dwelling comma attached, whereas we would have townhouse dwelling with no comma. And so my goal definitely would be to be consistent with how I'm doing it, so that if some of them were putting, you know, grade comma natural, that all the grade things would end up like that.
Yeah, I think that makes the most sense. Use the noun as the thing that you would be looking to, and then the other things are descriptors of the noun.
Okay. Does that make sense for others, for people who like wouldn't often look at a land use bylaw? If you saw attached, or I guess that's attached dwelling in italics, and thinking that that's a definition I should look up to look under A for attached or D for dwelling?
Yeah, I think that's where I was coming from, that my knowledge of how it's supposed to be structured, I don't have that basis of understanding, so I would naturally look under an A.
Yeah.
So what you might do as an alternative, if it doesn't get too big and clunky, would be to keep the words attached dwelling, for instance, in, and then in brackets just say C dwelling attached.
Yeah. Because that way you'd keep all like the dwelling definitions together, and somebody could look at all of those, but people wouldn't get lost.
Exactly.
Thanks. So what we're looking at on the screen here is our new proposal for how to.
I'm not seeing your screen.
Oh. Can anybody else see my screen?
Yeah, I'm seeing your screen.
Yeah.
Oh no, I've got it.
see
Sorry, I switched to. I pinned a video there.
Ah. Okay. So what this is trying to address is the issue with our current building definition, is that we just measure from all of the corners of a building, and we take the grade at each of the corners of a building, and from that we determine an average grade just based on, so if you have 4 corners and, you know, whatever the grade number is at each of those, and you divide by 4 to get the average grade, which is the line where you then start counting to count up for the height of a building. And the issue that we have is that if you put in more corners of a building on the uphill part of your building, your grade moves up. And so therefore you can actually build a taller building than if the uphill side was just a straight wall. So people end up with a building that's too tall. They'll just play with their corners, and they'll add some corners on the uphill side so that their building can actually be taller than otherwise. And so what we're proposing is to move to how West Vancouver measures their grade to measure building height, which essentially takes each of the corners or each of the line segments, but as a percentage of the overall perimeter wall. So then in essence, what it's trying to do is find a way to say, you know, your corners still matter, but what matters is how much of them, like the building wall, they represent. And so in theory, then if you had a building that was a square with 4 corners, each of them at a point, you'd end up with the same grade than if you added some more corners on the uphill side, because now each of those line segments is shorter.
It averages.
You end up with the grade in the same place, and you can't manipulate it the same way.
Yeah, I've worked with the West Vancouver version, and it seems fair.
Is it any more complicated, or is it?
It's more complicated.
Yeah.
So it's more complicated, but we kind of view it as more fair, because it more truly, I would say, represents the actual grade of a building than ours, which can be sort of, manipulated.
Is it going to have the unintended consequences of building a square block that's more unattractive?
No, it should have the effect of balancing out, so that, because right now you'd end up building a square block on the downhill side of your building and all kinds of funky stuff on the uphill side, because that's what we incentivize. And this in theory then should mean so that you're not penalized or incentivized for sort of your building design.
The way it works right now, Kirsty, is if you have multiple corners around your building, not just 4, And when you add those all up and then you divide by the number of corners that you have.
Yeah, no,
So-
I understand that. I just,
Okay.
it's just that there's often unintended consequences of things
Yeah.
that try to make things fair, and it results in ugliness, or, you know, like, anyway, I've seen it happen too many times. I'm not the architect though, so I've just seen consequences of bylaws in the city of Vancouver.
Yeah.
That are pretty awful.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I am aware, like, doing this change will be a change for people who are applying for permits, and will need some sort of explanation and sort of how-to guides for it. And then I think for the people who apply for permits most often, it'll be sort of the one time they'll have to learn how to do it, and then it can be incorporated. But for people who only apply for one building permit, it'll be a bigger piece. But
You're going to incorporate a diagram explaining this?
yeah, I think what I do is I have the bylaw, and then we'll have just like a separate thing with the diagram that says this is how you do it. That's not necessarily part of the bylaw, so we can update it.
I know I had an application turned down in West Vancouver because I did this, but I added, my addition was horizontal and not vertical. I didn't put my numbers in a column.
Yeah.
So if you're going to go that extent, that's something to think about. But I think this is a better approach. I think it's a fairer approach. I actually had a comment about the first item here.
Yeah.
In the definition of average grade. I read it and I read it again. And then the last time I read it, it seemed to me it would be possible to interpret that all of this applies only to carports.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And it's yeah. And I'm not, I understand what the intention is, but it sort of feels like having that little bit at the end about carports makes the whole sentence read as if it applies to carports.
Yeah. Yeah, like if it just ended at the outermost projection of the exterior walls,
then it's fine.
Yeah.
And maybe it needs a second sentence which says, and this includes it for carports, this includes the dimensions around the post of the building or of the structure.
Yeah. Yeah, because I'm trying to say, or it's trying to say like I know the house where I am in now has a carport that's out the side. So we're saying that would be included. Right. But if it's a deck, we're not including those posts and getting your grade.
And if you have a carport that has a roof that's a deck?
I know, which is actually what I have. So then I don't know what I would do with this.
What if it's listed as attached structure? Because it's not just limited to a carport, I would imagine. It could be an attached shed.
Yeah. Yeah. So to say something like exterior walls, and that this includes the dimensions around the posts of an attached carport, but a deck attached to a building is not considered. Something. Okay.
Well, there's no roof on a deck. If you roofed it, it may be a different story.
I was just thinking, my house, the carport is on the deck for the upstairs.
Right.
Ah, yeah.
So you'll have a lot of decks with that aren't carports until afterwards. But does it really matter? Who cares?
Yeah.
Well, I think the intention here is to exclude decks because that could in fact have a detrimental effect on your building height calculation if the deck is extensive.
Yeah.
So maybe it has to have something to do with the height of the deck above grade, Daniel. If it's high enough above grade to park a car under, then it should be considered perhaps.
Yeah. Okay. I might have to think about it and try out, like, see what happens on a permit that we have, what happens to the grade.
So what about circumstances where there's no possible vehicle access to a space below a deck that would otherwise qualify as a carport? under what was just discussed.
Yeah.
That's a condition on my property. I have a large deck constructed this year, but there's no possibility of driving a car back there. It's just, you know, too steep.
Right, it's just a
inaccessible.
raised deck, yeah.
Yeah.
But then height above ground is not really, doesn't factor into it. You can't use height above ground as a way to exclude the deck from a calculation of the overall height of the building.
Like, I think it's almost maybe cleaner if I just ended at exterior walls, because then I'm saying it's of the building. So it's not a deck, but it is the part of the building. So if your building includes posts that continue out, I measure around the perimeter of that building.
Well, what is it? What is the harm in just making it simple and ignoring the carport thing?
Yeah.
Like, I don't, you know, are we hitting a gnat with a sledgehammer?
It would probably be worth looking at it, you know, I don't know, West Van's bylaw or someone else's. It's my, because I think some jurisdictions actually, you do have to take into account the deck.
Yeah.
Attached decks, and in some jurisdictions you don't.
Yeah.
And I guess it's really a question of what your goal is. The question of it being a carport is kind of not germane, but if the deck were tall enough, should it then be considered in the overall massing of the building and therefore the overall height of the building?
Yeah.
So it is in one way, because the deck needs to be included in the building area.
Right.
All decks, anything 2 feet above grade.
That's right. So it sort of makes sense to actually include decks if they are more than 2 feet above ground. They're no longer part of the landscape, and then they need to be factored in.
Okay.
I think, Daniel, it might be good to see how 2 or 3 other jurisdictions are dealing with that.
Yeah.
To guide you in what you think you want to do. I don't want us to get too bogged down on this.
Yeah.
I know this stuff is, it's important. So I don't want to rush it. I think it's worth understanding how that particular issue is addressed elsewhere.
Yeah, that's a good note for me to deal with. Okay. So the next thing then we're looking at is we have this section called setback exceptions. And so these are things, you know, the setback for a zone, if it's a 7.5 meter front and a 3 meter side setback, which is pretty standard in our zones. These are things that can go into the setbacks. So some of the changes that we're looking at doing is, so in the first category is like bay windows, chimneys, cornices, is putting a maximum length of the, that it could be. So before they were already permitted to go 0.6 meters into the required setback. So one of the changes is to have that maximum length to it. So the bay window isn't the entire wall of the house, but it's got a maximum length. And as well, in our previous version, or in our current version, eaves and gutters were included in that section. And so what I've done is I moved them down to number 3, which is roof overhangs, eaves, and gutters. And then in the second category, again, we're looking at changing it so that it's, before it was 1.25 meters into front or rear, or like any setback. And based on when I brought this to the APC previously, it was having a lesser reduction in the setback into the side setback. And just find my other one. The other thing I've done is I've removed some of the things that were listed in our setback exceptions. So like in number 2, we used to include patios, which I've removed because in our definition, like a patio is something that's at grade, so it doesn't need a setback reduction. Let me see. And also things like sunshades I removed. Yeah. And I've never been able to answer how an eave is different than a roof overhang. I don't know if the architects have a way to address that, but so what I've done is I've put them in the same category so that at least they have the same, they're approached the same.
Yeah, I think that's a
What do you think, Drew?
when I look at an eave, I always think that's a roof overhang.
Yeah.
I think keeping them both in is fine because it's, I don't know, it's probably like, when is a cottage a cabin? I think there's that taking the, what's it called? Window, we would call them brise soleil, the window.
Shades.
Window?
Exterior shadings. It's like a louver, but above the window horizontally.
Okay.
On the exterior.
Yeah. And you said you took that out. And that can be quite an attractive architectural feature, and it could also be a very useful element for shading a building so that it doesn't get overly warm. So I'm not, and generally they're fairly like kind of filigree kind of element. So I'd be inclined to keep them in section 0.3. Martin, you have a comment on that?
No, I agree. I mean, a project of mine on the Sunshine Coast right now, we've added these and we were able to achieve step code 4 just through that.
Is that something that would be
that we've done? Sorry, like step code 3 from 2.
Yeah. Sorry, Drew, what did you say? The
term?
Shading devices.
Let's call it shading devices. We call them brise soleil, but that's just the French name.
Okay.
Right.
Would that be something that's in the first category? It's like heating or ventilating equipment and similar architectural features. Like I would list it in that list.
Yeah.
Okay. I can think of a couple things as well when it's my turn.
Okay.
Yeah, can I ask about point 2? I don't quite understand. I don't understand the last phrase of it. But such reduction applies only to the projecting features.
So if you have a bay window, Michael, your bay window can be up to 1.25 meters wide,
right?
And it can go over the setback line. You cannot project a bay window that is 1.3 meters wide over the setback line.
Oh, okay. Because I just read that above about the do not project more than 1.25 meters. So I see that as the bay window coming out across the setback line. Is that interpreting it correctly?
Yeah.
So that's the projection. And then I don't see what you'd say such reduction, but I don't see a reduction. And it may be my denseness. I don't.
It's the language that's strange.
It's a reduction of the requirement.
Okay. Because you always look for the anterior reference. You see a word like reduction, you look for the earliest.
Yeah.
The closer. Anyway, so you can clean that up.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, and I know you don't want us to wordsmith because that would just, we just don't have a lifetime to do it.
No, but it's helpful. I mean, even the language but such reduction applies only to the projecting feature. We've always kind of looked at, and we get questions about, well, what does that mean? So I've taken it to mean, well, like in the first one, right? It only applies to the projecting feature. Well, if it's for a chimney, you'd think, of course, it only applies to the chimney. What else does it mean?
Right.
So we've taken it to mean like for a balcony, say, it means it only applies to the projecting balcony and not to like posts that are supporting the balcony.
Yeah. But you can see how the language as it's now expressed got me into requiring Drew's explanation.
Yeah.
It's interesting. And
Thank you.
It's language that you find in a lot of these.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I think planning bylaws love sort of almost like words that end up, because we think they sound legalistic, even if they aren't, but we got couched in that language of like, we're going to make this sound official.
Well, we always used to say, make it so simple that even a judge can understand it.
And so the next part that we changed is again in the setback exception. So this is not for,
so can I just comment 2 more things?
Yeah.
On that. So, for example, City of Vancouver allows for additional exterior insulation and exterior building envelope components to be situated in the setbacks in certain conditions in order to help developers avoid losing interior usable space and at the same time achieving energy efficiency.
Okay.
So that's one. And the other one I don't see in here is temporary structures, like, you know, people have carports, that sort of thing, that are just kits. And some of them are fairly permanent, but or some others are very kind of flimsy. But in the end, some of these things can stand there for years.
That one I think shows up under siting of buildings and structures. The sheds that are in side yards and so on.
Yeah, that's kind of in this one.
Okay.
But you're right, in general, Martin, like if people ask me about temporary stuff, I say, well, we treat it exactly the same as a permanent one. Okay. And like technically, I think in our bylaw, like people who have like the carports that are on, you know, they're like the posts with the plastic overtop thing. Technically, I would think it's a structure. It's like, you know, it's supported by land, and it should meet our
carry snow loads, rain, whatever.
Yeah.
Means. Yep.
And if somebody complained about their neighbors, that's what we would have to say as well. If it's, you know, it's like a building, just because it's temporary, it still needs a thing. Our new building bylaw has a provision for temporary buildings, but it's actually quite onerous.
I think the other provision that Martin's pointing to, though, is an important one. It might need a 4th bullet to cover it. As we, you know, now the municipality has adopted step 3 of the Energy Step Code. And we're moving into the realm of having more exterior insulation. I can see far down the road, or we might have as much as 6 inches, 15 centimeters of outboard insulation outside the wall of the building.
Yeah.
And there shouldn't be a penalty and have to move the building as a function of that.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, what we've done, and I'll show you later, is our floor area definition is changing to go to the interior of the wall as a way to not penalize for places that have floor area regulations, not penalize thicker walls.
Right.
But this would be the flip. So that's like saying where we measure from the inside of the floor area. And this is talking about, well, can you go further on the outside?
I don't think there's a conflict between the two.
No.
I think this is really, particularly, I mean, if you look at some of the new small lot conditions, small sites.
Yeah.
If you take setbacks from the side property lines, for instance, you know, and if you've got 6 inches of outboard insulation, that could be an issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, most commercial buildings are built that way, where all insulation is on the exterior.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So, but you know, it's a good incentive to help developers build energy efficient buildings. Too. I can find that in the City of Vancouver.
Okay, that'd be great.
Bylaws. Sorry about my camera. It's cracked.
That's okay.
Thanks to my son playing with it.
I just thought it was the wildfires. It just looks
really
lost in the haze.
That's right. It's really, really, really thick here on Lenore. Pardon me. Can hardly breathe. I'm waving right now.
Oh yeah.
Ah.
I can see that. And so the next is still staying on the setback exceptions, is looking at some of the other things that we allow within the setbacks. So looking at changing, so when we allow self-contained landscaping ponds within the setback, and so it's having a maximum size that can be. Previously, we allowed retaining walls to be up to 2.5 meters. And so looking to change it to allow retaining walls of 2 meters. And it's not listed here, I think because when I was doing my slide, I got it wrong, but we also want to make that setback exception subject to the setback from the sea, lakes and water courses, so that you would not be permitted a retaining wall within the setback to the sea without a variance.
Not at all.
Let me try to find my...
I remember talking about that a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah, we talked about it. Remember? Yeah.
I'm trying to check the actual document.
What we wanted to avoid was the brick wall up high from the beach, but we didn't want to make it so that people couldn't put appropriate retaining walls, I thought.
Yeah, we were looking at sort of erosion prevention issues.
So what I put in the bylaw, retaining walls not exceeding a height of 2.0 meters may be sited on any portion of a lot subject to setbacks to the sea, lakes, watercourses, wetlands. So it sounds like what you're saying is not that, but to have, but maybe there's a lesser height that's appropriate within the setback, within those setbacks.
I like the way North Vancouver does that. The district, the limitation is, I think it might even be as little as 1.2 or 1.25 meters.
Yeah.
And then you can have, another one, but and then you can have another one behind each of them, but they must be no more than a 45-degree angle above each other. Which then by default means that they're fairly well, they're going to be 4 feet apart as well as being 4 feet high. So you end up with a kind of terraced condition.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and it would make sense for us to go, like, we require a building permit for any retaining wall that's more than 1.5 meters is our limit. So I could see us saying you can have it up to 1.5 meters within the setback to the sea.
Uh-huh.
And then find some way to then, distinguish that you can't have a retaining wall immediately on top of a retaining wall. It's not.
Yeah, we've seen that.
Yeah. Okay. So I will take more look at that one.
Can I just ask a question about setbacks to the sea?
Yeah.
My assumption is that there's a setback to protect the shoreline. So if we're allowing setbacks for walls within the setback, isn't that defeating the purpose to some degree?
Yeah, I mean, that's what we found. Like right now we have a 30-meter setback to the sea, although it's less if your neighbors are closer. But like currently our land use bylaw allows a 2.5-meter retaining wall to be in that setback. And we've had definite issues with that where people will build, 2.5 meters is like 8 foot 4 inches. So you can build a 8-foot retaining wall.
And there's nothing precluding building another one on top of it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that how we measure it is because then we're saying, well, where's the natural grade? The natural grade was at the bottom of the retaining wall. And so you can't, but it's a little messy trying to
but we're not just protecting the sea. We're trying to protect the house, I thought. Like, isn't this, it's all very well to be protecting the coastline, but I thought that the whole point of these things was to protect the structure and make sure that it didn't wash into the sea.
Yeah, although I mean, if you're 30 meters, if you were building 30 meters back,
It's not an issue.
Yeah.
You can
Or
use.
you'd put, you know, in theory, then you could put a retaining wall that's outside the setback, so it's 30 meters away, and you could build it, you know, like 9 meters tall, I guess, in theory, as tall as a structure.
But you said, Daniel, that a building permit would be required for that. What criteria would you follow?
It's really that it's engineered.
Oh, okay, so you wouldn't be looking at environmental concerns or?
No, not if it's not in a, if it's in a development permit area. So that's like if it's by a water course or a stream or something, okay, then that would trigger us looking at that. But generally, no, it's just that it's safe.
So I still don't understand why it's allowed within the setback.
Well, if you live on a beach that's above a beach that's gradually going up, not that far to your house, you probably want to have some protection so that you don't lose more and more of the land in front of your house as the waves roll in, and which I've seen happen on the beach below me. So I think that you know, surely you would want to be allowed to have some, even if you're not building your house there, but surely you want to put something there so that you're not just losing land all the time. And your house will pretty soon be within the setback.
The retaining walls are actually not very good for mitigation of erosion by the ocean. But I think the point is, while it's a setback area, it is still property that's owned by the homeowner. And it may be that they need some retaining walls to be able to establish some stairways in order to actually be able to get down to the waterfront.
Yeah, well, the ones I've seen they're built to establish a garden, right, or something like that, which right, may or may not be a good thing depending on the circumstances.
Right.
So I think, Louise, like how I've actually drafted, not what's on the slide, but what I've actually put in the bylaw would be to remove the exception for retaining walls in the setback to the sea entirely, and not permit them. But what I'm hearing from the APC is rather an approach where there's some height of retaining wall that is allowed within that setback.
Well, I don't know. I'd prefer there be no retaining walls at all, but at the same, what's the point of having a setback to protect the ocean if you let people build anything in it? But having said that, I think we do need an exception if the topography of a particular lot makes the building area useless.
Yeah.
Well, I think it's the analogy. I've done a fair amount of work in Pender Harbor, which has, you know, some pretty steep topography coming down to the ocean, coming down to the water. However, in that area, the Sunshine Coast Regional District, their bylaw does not permit construction in the setback to the ocean. However, you can do landscaping, and that's right. So, well, that sounds funny, Michael, but landscape features are limited to 2 feet above the ground.
Ah, okay. So
they're much less impactful than an 8 foot high retaining wall, which we currently allow. So, you know, I think there needs to be. I think it's overly draconian to say you can't do anything, and I can't get down to the water even though I bought waterfront property. But limiting what people can do in a way of saying you can do landscaping, that's fine. That to me makes more sense.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean, like a rock garden rather than a rock wall.
Correct. Or even low concrete walls to allow you to build stairs or whatever.
Yeah.
Also, this doesn't necessarily apply to water, proximity to water, but also to streets, roads, other properties.
That's true.
Could be, you know, inside anywhere on the island.
Yeah.
I'm mindful here that stuff wants us to be complete in 10 minutes.
Okay.
So I'm just wondering, it seems like Daniel's getting a lot of value out of your input.
Yeah.
Would it be illegal for you guys to just reconvene on a different channel and make this sort of an unofficial conversation? If you're just brain sharing.
Well, I think it says I have 6 more slides. So why don't we see how far we get?
Okay.
I would support that. I wouldn't tell anybody except for YouTube.
Yeah. And so the last point is just that we currently allow accessory buildings that are not more than 2.5 meters high and not more than 10 square meters to be sited within the setbacks. But I'm just trying to fix that currently it's defined by floor area. And so it wouldn't actually, like something like a carport that's open that doesn't have a floor area would technically then be permitted at any size. It doesn't have a floor area. And I was trying to find some way to cover that it means actually the footprint of the building and not just its floor area.
I'd better get going on my carpet before.
It would have to be at 8 foot and 4 inch.
It's going to be a low carport, but that's okay. Yeah. I'm not very tall.
Yeah.
You need a carport, Drew.
I know I do.
Sure. I would love to have one.
Yeah. Well, maybe we should.
For my car.
We should probably get together and have a conversation with Daniel.
Okay.
So the next one then is some of our definition changes. So this one's the floor area. And this is where rather than measuring to the outer exterior and deducting an amount, we would measure just to the inner surface of the exterior walls and windows. And that's trying to find a way to sort of incentivize thicker walls, or not penalize, I guess, thicker walls. And at the same time, then it's changing the height of what we consider sort of a crawl space to reduce it from 2 meters to 1.5 meters. So since we've allowed the detached secondary suites, we've seen lots of 2 meter basements to not be included in the floor area. And so we're going to reduce the height of that amount to 1.5 meters. And the next one then is lot coverage. So this ends up, for most zones on Bowen, this ends up being the controlling amount, although many people don't meet it, or don't come close to it. But like few of our zones actually have a floor area calculation, and more often we're dealing with lot coverage. And currently our definition talks about the horizontal footprint of a building. And so we've seen people essentially project out over the footprint, so where it actually is touching the ground, and then they go, well, I've extended, the wing projects out, and so it's not part of the footprint. And so we're looking to put in, instead, to change it to the total horizontal area that may be built upon.
So this means cantilevered portions cannot be excluded.
Yeah. And sort of to better capture, what we think of as lot coverage. It's like how much is covered by the lot, as opposed to just where it's touching the ground.
Right.
And then we also want to explicitly put in to say, okay, what are eaves are not included in the lot coverage. Right. So generally we haven't counted it, but it hasn't been clear, and partly could be the footprint. And so we're saying if it's the area, we want to be clear that we're not counting sort of roof overhangs or eaves that extend out.
Yeah. So just to be consistent, you probably need to say excluding eaves and roof overhangs.
Yeah, it's just we've established them as separate items.
Right.
You probably don't need to say both buildings and structures, because isn't a building defined as a structure with a roof?
With a roof, yeah.
Well, they have different definitions.
But they're defined. Michael's right. A building is a structure with a roof structure is a building. So.
Yeah, you know what? I think it is repetitive, but it might assist somebody reading the bylaw to understand that it's not just the building. I think that's what you're trying to communicate, right?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, that it applies to structures as well. This next one I'm still not happy with, but it's sort of been our working thing that we've put in. So a front lot line definition on Bowen is always a challenge. So what's currently in there is just that. So how we currently define lot line is the shortest lot line that's common to a lot and a highway. And often on Bowen, this results then in what we consider the front lot line to be something that has not much relation to where sort of the front of the lot actually is, or how they access the lot. Or can end up in a situation where if somebody just like amends their lot, that they end up with a new lot line because now there's a new shorter little piece that's there. So this is essentially then borrowing what Salt Spring and a couple of the other Gulf Islands do, which says, okay, the lot line has to be a certain length before it's counted as the front lot line, so all the little bits don't count. But I don't think this fully sort of solves our problem.
My question is, what if at some point down the road, both lines are less than 20 meters?
Yeah, there's not anything that's longer than 20.
Yeah, you're missing an is or something there. If no lot line is greater than 20 meters.
Yeah.
The longest line abutting a highway is the front. That's one of those, I know what it is when I see it, but I can't explain it.
If neither line is 20 meters, what happens?
The longer of the two, the longest shorter than 20 meters.
Yeah.
So you really need to say if no lot line is greater than 20 meters, the longest of those lines abutting a highway is the front or something like that.
Yeah, that's clear.
Yeah.
This happened to me recently, and the current definition is really the front became the side, or the side became the front. Yeah. It's really weird.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like we need to just sort of say, if you're facing a street, it's a front yard, or a highway, as they call it here. So in
my project, I had two. There were two, the back and the front, if you will, both were facing a highway.
Yeah, back to back, they faced each other.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, that still makes sense, doesn't it? That those would be a front yard setbacks.
Well, yeah, I'm sorry. I don't want to get us bogged down here, because there was a good choice and I didn't get to make it.
But you're right, Dennis. I mean, there's some logic in saying, well, just any line that's touching the highway is the front lot line.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, because when you're driving down a street, not that we have huge differences in setbacks, but it just would be a little weird having, on that particular street, the building is real close to the street because it's considered not a front yard, but in fact a rear yard.
Or a side yard, yeah.
Or a side yard, yeah.
Front and rear are usually the same.
Yeah.
But sorry, I'm trying to picture the various changes that would make to a setback depending on which lot line you chose. But because the setback from the highway, right, is bigger than any other.
I mean, it's 4.6.
Yeah.
But the side often is 3 and the front is 7.
Oh, the front is 7, yeah. So
yeah,
we want to make sure we don't allow somebody to bring their house to within 4 meters of a highway, right? Is that the aim?
I don't think that's the goal.
Well,
but then it's funny because then why do we have a setback? Like we have a setback to the highway of 4.6. So we're envisioning that you could be next to a highway and it's not the front.
Okay.
And that's why there's a highway setback.
Oh, well, then why? So I don't think we really, if we go the way of saying wherever you face a highway, it is a front yard setback, we don't really need then a setback from the highway standard, because it is going to be a front yard setback.
But we would squeeze all the lots that sort of have a road running around it. And like what we found more, like so more in sort of the newer subdivisions on Bowen are more likely to have more road frontages. Because essentially if you think like some of our older subdivisions, so like where I am in Scarborough or in Deep Bay, we're done sort of on a grid in New Westminster, and you're more likely to have straight lines. And the more modern subdivisions are more likely to be shaped by the contours of the ground, and the road kind of fills in around it, and you'll end up with more lots that have lots of lots of frontages up with the highway.
Yeah, and just to make sure I understand it, I mean, if there's just a single straight lot line that's common between the lot and the highway, none of this applies, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
No,
got
that's
it.
a side yard.
Oh, don't complicate things for me.
Okay, so I'm gonna move on, but I'm gonna flag this as something that I still need work on. And if people have any thoughts on lot lines, feel free to give me a call or email. The next one is then definition for a height for a retaining wall and fence, which is trying to capture how we do it in practice, which is to say we're just doing it from each point of the fence or the retaining wall. Whereas currently what our definition actually says we would do is we would take the average of the grade, which makes no sense if you think about a fence like on a slope. You would say, I'll average out this point and this point of the fence and say, this is the grade, and you can be 2 meters up from there. If you're on a hillside coming down, you'd say, it can't be anything at the top of the hill, and you can have a giant fence at the bottom of the hill. is a little strange.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah. The next, we're changing the sign definition. So right now our sign definition talks about it being a structure in which things happen. And so we're just trying to change that to be, it's more the thing is the sign rather than the structure is the sign. So we've had discussions with people in the past in terms of like, if you're painting a name on the side of a building, is that a sign?
And indeed it is.
Yes, so yeah. And so, you know, some of our zones, especially commercial zones, have maximum sizes for signs. So we're trying to say, okay, it's when you're writing the name, that's your sign.
So this would catch, for example, the distillery sign.
Just for example.
Yeah. Okay.
Right, and then the last one I just had is that we're adding we didn't used to have a definition for retaining wall, so it's adding a definition for retaining wall. So in part we've had issues with people saying, well, it's a retaining wall because I can build it in the setback, even though it's sort of, I don't know, it may be like a box structure that they're then filling in with stuff to make a flat, and they're not actually retaining anything, they're like creating the thing they want to retain.
Yeah, that was my comment about the ones I've seen are garden building.
Yeah, because it has to actually be a retaining wall. And that was the end of the things that I pulled from the bylaw itself to put in a presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing there. Obviously, there are more things in the bylaw itself. But that's what I had pulled.
On this, Daniel?
Say which?
What is your timeline? You were asking people to email in their comments.
Oh, yes. So I'm going to council to discuss at a committee of the whole October 13th. And that's the first real conversation I'll have had with council on the whole thing. And I would expect from that, you know, either direction to change it and come back to talk to council again, or to actually come back to the AP, like to revise it and maybe go back to the APC. I'm sure, you know, I'll be back to the APC at some point to talk about it. But if you have thoughts before that council meeting, then I can incorporate changes before I even talk to them in the first place.
So do you want to say like a deadline of October 5th for comments before the committee of the whole?
Sure.
And okay.
Probably the 3rd. What's the Friday the week before? That's when my report will be due.
The 2nd.
Yeah.
So we'll say the 2nd. But you guys will get it in before that.
Yeah.
And then it'll probably come around again.
Yeah, I'm sure well, unless council kills the whole thing, we'll be back.
David, do you expect council to kill it?
No.
This is overdue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so are we good then on that, Daniel? For now?
I think so. Like, Steph has notes. I don't need a motion. Like, we're just looking for comment and not for like recommendation.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Right.
So next meeting is the 21st of October, Wednesday.
Perfect.
See you then.
Motion to adjourn. Where's David Lynch?
Oh,
Hey,
lost him.
I guess dropped off.
I guess.
it's hard to know because
I'll move.
Yeah.
Daniel, maybe I'll touch base with you tomorrow.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay. Night.
Thank you
Thanks,
guys.
everyone.
See you later.
Great.
Stay safe.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye-bye.